It all started with a laugh. Not mine, not Lauren's, but a man's low, throaty chuckle that echoed from the back patio at the exact moment I stepped out of the garage. It wasn't the kind of laugh you hear from someone enjoying a joke. No, it had a smugness to it, like someone who knew they were getting away with something. I stopped in my tracks, the bags of groceries in my hands digging into my fingers as the door swung shut behind me. The sound of that laugh changed the air around me. It wasn't right. It didn't belong there. I dropped the bags inside the kitchen and moved quietly toward the sliding glass door that led to the patio. Through the sheer curtains, I saw them, Lauren, leaning against the rail of the deck, her body angled toward a man I didn't recognize. She had a drink in her hand, and she was laughing, not just a polite laugh but the kind of laugh I hadn't seen in years, the one that used to light up her whole face when we were first together. And then there was him, standing too close, his hand on the railing just inches from hers. My chest tightened, and my mind raced. Who was this guy? He wasn't a neighbor. He wasn't a friend I'd met. And he sure as hell wasn't supposed to be here, looking at my wife like she was the answer to all his problems. Ethan! Lauren's voice suddenly called from the patio as though she'd sensed me standing there. She turned, spotted me through the glass, and smiled a little too wide, a little too bright. You're home early. I pushed open the door, my movements slower than usual, like my body didn't trust me to handle whatever was about to happen. Yeah, I got done faster than I thought, I replied, my voice steady but my heart pounding. I glanced at the man, who had stepped back slightly, the confident smile still plastered on his face. This is Alex, Lauren said quickly. He's the landscaper. The landscaper? That was rich. We didn't have a landscaper. I was the landscaper. Every Saturday, it was me out there, sweating through my shirt while she joked about my uneven mowing lines. Landscaper, huh? I said, raising an eyebrow. My eyes flicked between the two of them, taking in the way she clutched her glass just a little too tight and the way his gaze lingered on her just a little too long. Yeah, Lauren said, a nervous laugh slipping out. He's been helping with the garden. You know, the one I've been talking about fixing up forever. He's got great ideas. Great ideas, I echoed, my voice laced with a skepticism that made Lauren's eyes dart away. Alex extended his hand, his grin infuriatingly unshaken. Nice to meet you, Ethan. You've got a beautiful home and a beautiful wife. There it was. That slip, that tiny tell. He hadn't meant to say it, but he had. His smile wavered for just a second, and I caught the flicker of something in his eyes, arrogance, maybe, or guilt. Whatever it was, it planted the first seed of doubt in my mind, a doubt that would grow into something much darker. That moment marked the beginning. I didn't know it then, but it was the first crack in the facade of the life I thought I had. It wouldn't take long for everything to unravel. The following Saturday, I decided to work from home, which in my line of work meant answering a few emails while keeping an eye on the backyard. I'd wanted to see if this landscaper, Alex, would show up again. If he did, I'd get to the bottom of whatever was going on. Lauren didn't seem to notice my sudden interest in staying home. She moved around the kitchen that morning, pouring herself coffee and chatting about the kids' schedules, the weather, and a potential vacation we'd been planning. She was too casual, too chirpy, a tone she usually reserved for situations when she wanted to avoid a deeper conversation. It was like a stranger had taken over my wife. Around noon, she mentioned needing to step out for a bit. I'll just be at the garden center, she said, grabbing her purse. Need any help? I asked, keeping my tone light. She hesitated for a split second, a hesitation so small it might have gone unnoticed. But I noticed. No, she said, smiling. I've got it under control. The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my own keys and followed her. Not too close, not too far. Just enough to keep her in sight. My pulse was hammering the whole time, and I had this gnawing sense that whatever I found, it wouldn't be good. She didn't go to the garden center. Instead, she pulled into the parking lot of a small cafe on the other side of town, the kind of place neither of us would usually bother with. It was too far from home, too out of the way. From where I sat in my car, I saw her walk inside. A few minutes later, Alex, the landscaper, pulled up in a black pickup. He parked, stepped out, and strolled inside like he owned the place. I felt my chest tighten again, but I forced myself to stay put. This wasn't the time for a confrontation, not yet. I wanted to see how far this would go, how deep the betrayal ran. The cafe had large windows, and I positioned myself at an angle to get a clear view. They sat in a corner booth, leaning in close. Alex's arm rested on the back of the seat, his fingers brushing the fabric of Lauren's blouse. She didn't flinch or move away. I watched as they talked, laughed, and shared a dessert. It wasn't overly physical, no kissing, no overt displays of affection. But the way they looked at each other, the way she smiled at him, it was enough to make my stomach churn. After about an hour, they left the cafe together. I followed them to a park a few blocks away. Lauren led him to a bench under a large oak tree, where they sat close, heads bent in conversation. It wasn't until Alex leaned in, his hand on her knee, and whispered something in her ear that I knew. This wasn't innocent. This wasn't just friends or colleagues. This was something else entirely. I stayed hidden behind a row of bushes, watching as they stood and began walking toward a secluded path that led deeper into the park. That was when I decided I'd seen enough. I snapped a few pictures on my phone, then quietly left. That night, I didn't say a word about what I'd seen. I played my role as the loving husband, though every time I looked at Lauren, a part of me wanted to scream. Instead, I began gathering evidence. The next day, I installed a few discreet cameras around the house, one on the back patio, one facing the driveway, and another in the living room. I wanted to know everything. It didn't take long for the cameras to deliver. Over the next 2 weeks, I saw Alex come to the house twice when I wasn't supposed to be home. Both times, Lauren had told me she was taking the kids out or going to run errands, but the footage told a different story. The first time, they stayed on the back patio. There was nothing overtly damning, but the way they interacted spoke volumes. He touched her shoulder as they laughed, his fingers lingering too long. She leaned toward him, hanging on his every word. The second time was worse. They didn't stay outside. Alex arrived just after I left for work, and within minutes, they were inside the house. I watched the footage that evening, sitting alone in my office, my stomach in knots. Lauren led him into the living room, where they sat on the couch. I couldn't watch anymore. I didn't need to see what came next. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. Lauren had mentioned she'd be out late for a work meeting, but I didn't buy it for a second. I told her I had a late conference call and wouldn't be home until midnight. It was a lie. Of course, I stayed parked a few streets away, waiting to see if Alex would show up. Sure enough, just after 9 p.m., his truck pulled into our driveway. I let him go inside, waited a full 10 minutes, and then made my move. I didn't knock. I didn't call out. I used my own key, opened the front door, and stepped inside. The sound of laughter floated down the hallway from the living room, the same laugh I'd heard that first day. My hands balled into fists as I walked toward it. When I rounded the corner, they both froze. Lauren was on the couch, her feet tucked under her, a glass of wine in hand. Alex sat beside her, too close, holding his own glass. "Don't let me interrupt," I said, my voice cold and even. Lauren's eyes widened in shock, and she scrambled to her feet. "Ethan! What are you doing here?" Alex, to his credit, didn't try to bolt. Instead, he set his glass down and gave me that same infuriating smile. "You must be Alex," I said, stepping closer. "The landscaper, right?" His smile faltered, but he stayed seated. "Ethan, this isn't what it looks like," Lauren started, her voice shaky. "Really?" I said, turning to her. "Because it looks like my wife has been sneaking around behind my back with this guy." She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Alex, finally realizing the gravity of the situation, stood and began backing toward the door. "You might want to leave," I told him, my voice low and menacing. He didn't argue. Without another word, he grabbed his jacket and practically ran out the door. Lauren and I were left alone, the silence between us deafening. "Ethan, Save it," I snapped. "We'll talk tomorrow." Right now, I can't even look at you. I turned and walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. That night, I slept in the car, my mind racing with anger, pain, and a million questions. But one thing was clear: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke up stiff and cold in the driver's seat of my car. My back ached, and my mind was still replaying every second of the previous night. Lauren's face when I walked in, the way Alex bolted, it was burned into my brain. I sat there for a moment, staring through the windshield at nothing, before finally pulling myself together. This wasn't the time to wallow. It was time for answers. I drove home around 7 a.m., knowing the kids would already be getting ready for school. Lauren would be up too, probably waiting for me, scrambling to come up with a story. When I walked through the door, she was in the kitchen, sipping coffee. Her face was pale, her eyes bloodshot like she hadn't slept a minute. She turned as I entered, but before she could say a word, I held up a hand to stop her. "Not here," I said sharply. "Not in front of the kids." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish, but she nodded. I marched upstairs, helped the kids get ready, and dropped them off at school. Lauren tried to speak to me as I was leaving, but I didn't respond. I didn't trust myself to stay calm if I started now. By the time I returned, she was sitting at the dining table, still clutching her coffee cup. It looked like she hadn't moved. "All right," I said as I sat across from her, my voice flat. "Talk." Lauren set her mug down carefully, like it was the most delicate thing in the world. "Ethan, last night wasn't. It wasn't what you think." "Really?" "Because it looked like you invited another man into our home, our living room, while I was gone. So please, Lauren, enlighten me, what exactly am I misunderstanding?" She flinched at my tone but pressed on. "I know it looks bad. I know I should have told you about Alex sooner, but..." "Stop," I interrupted. "Told me what, exactly?" "That the landscaper I've seen touching you, laughing with you, walking around my house like he owns it, is more than just a friend?" Her face flushed, but she didn't deny it. "I need the truth, Lauren. All of it. Now. Who is he, and what's been going on?" For a moment, she just sat there, her eyes on the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear her. "We met at the gym." The gym. That damn gym membership she'd insisted on renewing a few months ago. And we started talking. It was innocent at first, just casual conversations about workouts, life, stuff like that. He's a personal trainer. He gave me tips, advice. "Don't sugarcoat this," I snapped. "We're way past innocent." Lauren's hands trembled as she gripped her coffee cup tighter. "It wasn't supposed to be anything more," she said. "But it just happened. We started spending more time together. I didn't mean for it to get this far." "This far," I repeated, my voice low and icy. "What exactly does this far mean, Lauren? Did you sleep with him?" Her eyes shot up to meet mine, wide and panicked. No, Ethan, I swear. We never. It wasn't like that." "Then what was it?" I demanded, slamming my hand on the table. "Because from where I'm standing, it sure as hell looks like an affair." "It wasn't an affair," she cried, tears spilling over. "It was just emotional. I swear, Ethan, I never cheated on you. Not physically." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh even to my own ears. "Emotional? You're trying to tell me that inviting him into our house, hiding it from me, wasn't cheating? That acting like a couple while your husband's out isn't cheating? Do you even hear yourself right now?" "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed. "I was lonely, Ethan. You've been so distant, so focused on work and the kids and everything else. I didn't feel like you saw me anymore." "Don't you dare blame this on me," I snapped. "You were lonely, so your solution was to find another man? To sneak around behind my back? Do you even realize what you've done to us?" "I didn't want to hurt you," she said through her tears. "I was stupid, okay? I let it get out of hand, and I'm so sorry. Please, Ethan, you have to believe me. Her words hung in the air, but they didn't reach me. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, and felt nothing but a hollow, burning rage. I don't believe you, I said finally. You didn't think about me. You didn't think about the kids. You thought about yourself. And now, we're all paying the price. Lauren's sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. You want to save this? I continued, my voice shaking with anger. Then you'll cut him out of your life completely. No more Alex. No calls, no texts, no gym sessions. Nothing. And you're going to earn my trust back, if that's even possible. I will, she said desperately. I promise, Ethan. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll block his number, I'll quit the gym, I'll prove to you that I'm serious. You'd better, I said, standing up. Because if I so much as suspect you're lying to me again, we're done. I walked out of the room without another word, my heart pounding as I headed upstairs. For the rest of the day, I avoided her. The kids came home, oblivious to the storm brewing under our roof, and I played my part as the doting father. Lauren kept her distance, her eyes red and swollen whenever I caught a glimpse of her. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that her promises were empty. The damage was done, and no amount of words or tears could undo it. I didn't trust her. And I didn't know if I ever would again. The night after Lauren's tearful confession, I stared at the ceiling until the early hours of the morning, my mind spinning. Her words echoed in my head, claims of loneliness, her insistence that nothing physical had happened, her promises to cut off Alex. None of it felt like enough. I wasn't sure if it was anger or betrayal driving me, but by the time the sun began to peek through the curtains, I had a plan. If Lauren thought she could brush this under the rug with a few apologies and promises, she was sorely mistaken. This wasn't going to end with me looking like a fool, quietly forgiving her while she played the victim. I wasn't going to let her walk away from this without consequences. First, I started digging. Lauren thought she had me fooled with her tearful declarations, but I needed to know for sure. If she lied about the affair being just emotional, I wanted the proof. I couldn't rely on her word alone. Using her absence during the day, I delved into her digital life. I'd already seen Alex on the cameras and followed her to the cafe. What I needed now was the full picture. Her laptop was password protected, but her phone wasn't. She'd probably never thought I'd snoop, or maybe she thought deleting a few texts would cover her tracks. I spent hours going through her email, browser history, and photo backups. At first, I found nothing concrete. But eventually, a deeper search into her cloud storage uncovered folders that hadn't been synced to her phone in a while. It was in those files that I found what I needed: screenshots of text exchanges with Alex and a set of hidden photos. The texts painted a clear picture. They weren't just flirting or chatting. They talked about meeting up, about the feelings they were developing. There were references to how wrong it all was and how amazing it felt anyway. Then there were the photos. Nothing overtly sexual, but intimate enough: her at the gym in tight workout gear, a selfie of them sitting together at the cafe, his hand casually resting on her knee. So much for her promise that it hadn't gone further than emotional. With the evidence in hand, I began planning my retaliation. I wasn't going to shout, scream, or confront her again. That wasn't enough. I wanted her to understand the magnitude of what she'd done. First, I consulted a lawyer. Quietly. While Lauren went about her days pretending everything was fine, I was in an office laying the groundwork for what would come next. I explained the situation to the lawyer, handed over the evidence, and started preparing for divorce. But divorce wasn't my only goal. I wasn't just going to leave her. I wanted her to lose the comfortable life she'd built on the back of my trust. Lauren didn't work full-time. Her part-time teaching position at the local school was more of a passion project than a necessity. I'd been the primary breadwinner for years, covering the mortgage, the bills, and the kids' extracurriculars. If she wanted to rebuild her life, she was going to have to start from scratch. Next, I reached out to Alex. Not directly, there was no need to give him the satisfaction of knowing I cared enough to confront him personally. Instead, I did my research. A few quick searches online revealed that Alex wasn't just a personal trainer. He was also an independent contractor for one of the local gyms, running his own business under their banner. The gym had a strict code of conduct, especially when it came to relationships with clients. I compiled the screenshots and photos I'd found, packaged them into an anonymous email, and sent it to the gym's management. I kept it professional, explaining that I was concerned about his behavior with a married client and attaching the evidence. The response came swiftly. A week later, I overheard Lauren on the phone with a friend, talking about how Alex had been let go from his position. Apparently, someone complained, she said, her voice full of frustration. He's devastated. He said it wasn't fair, that it was all a misunderstanding. I smiled to myself. That was step 1. Step 2 involved the finances. I'd always handled the household budget, which meant I knew exactly where our money was and where it went. Quietly, I began shifting funds. I moved half of our joint savings into a separate account under my name, an account Lauren didn't know about. Then I canceled the credit card she used for her personal expenses. It was subtle at first, she didn't notice until she tried to use it at the grocery store. When she came to me asking what had happened, I shrugged. Bank fraud, I said simply. They must have flagged the card. I'll look into it. I didn't. Finally, I began preparing the house. This part was trickier, as I didn't want the kids to feel the impact of what was happening just yet. But I needed to ensure that when everything came to a head, I had the upper hand. I contacted my lawyer again and began the process of securing the house in my name. Since I'd been the one paying the mortgage, it wasn't difficult to establish my claim. By the time the paperwork was done, Lauren wouldn't have a legal leg to stand on. The final piece of my plan fell into place on a Sunday morning. Lauren had been trying to mend fences all week, acting sweet and attentive, cooking my favorite meals, and spending extra time with the kids. But I could see through it. It wasn't remorse, it was fear. That morning, I handed her a folder containing the evidence I'd gathered, along with a copy of the divorce papers. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Read it," I said coldly. As she flipped through the pages, her face went pale. "Ethan," she whispered. "You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious," I replied. "You destroyed this marriage, Lauren. You don't get to play the victim now." "But the kids. The kids will be fine. I'm not taking them away from you, but I'm not staying married to a liar." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" I said. "Freedom? Well, congratulations. You're free. But you'll do it without me." Lauren didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at the papers as if they held the key to her undoing. And in a way, they did. After handing Lauren the divorce papers, I gave her a week. I told her she could stay in the house for now, but I wasn't interested in any arguments, tears, or manipulative theatrics. I needed time to think away from her, and I wanted her to have time to come to terms with the fact that this was happening. I stayed with my brother during that week. He didn't ask many questions, which was just as well. I wasn't ready to dive into the specifics with him yet. My focus was on what came next. I had no illusions about how messy divorce could get, and I wanted to be prepared for every contingency. By the time I returned to the house, I was calmer. Not at peace, exactly, but steadier. Lauren, on the other hand, looked like she hadn't slept since the moment I'd walked out. Her eyes were hollow, her posture slumped. We sat down that evening, once the kids were in bed, and began what I knew would be the hardest conversation of my life. "I've read through the papers," Lauren said, her voice quiet. She sat across from me at the dining table, her hands folded in front of her like a nervous schoolgirl. "Is this really what you want, Ethan? Are you sure we can't work through this?" I stared at her, wondering if she truly believed there was still a way back from this. "What exactly is it you think we're working through, Lauren?" I asked. "You broke my trust. You betrayed me. And now you want me to pretend everything's fine because you're scared of losing what you have? It's not about that, she said quickly. I love you, Ethan. I love our family. I know I made a mistake. A mistake, I interrupted, my tone sharp. You call this a mistake? Sneaking around with another man, lying to my face, bringing him into our home, that's not a mistake, Lauren. That's a series of deliberate choices. You didn't just trip and fall into an emotional affair. She flinched, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't respond. But then she leaned forward, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to hurt you. I was stupid, and I let things go too far, but I never stopped loving you. Can't we at least try counseling? For the kids, if nothing else? I shook my head. The time to suggest counseling was before you decided to replace our marriage with Alex. Not now. Not after everything. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked down at the table. Do you even want to hear my side of things? I've heard enough, I said. But if it makes you feel better, go ahead. Explain to me how you justified all of this in your head. Lauren took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. It wasn't about you, Ethan. It wasn't about the kids. It was about me. I felt invisible. Like I was just going through the motions every day: work, house, parenting, repeat. And when Alex started talking to me, showing interest, I felt alive again. It was selfish, I know that now, but I didn't think it would get to this point. That's your excuse? I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts to stay calm. You felt invisible, so you decided to blow up our family? Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds? Her face crumpled, and she started crying again, but I didn't stop. Do you know what I felt, Lauren? While you were out there feeling alive with Alex, I was working my ass off to keep this family together. I was sacrificing my time, my energy, everything, to make sure you and the kids had a good life. And this is how you repay me? I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sorry doesn't fix this, I said coldly. It doesn't undo the lies, the betrayal, the damage you've done. You've destroyed something we spent over a decade building, and now you want me to just forgive you because you're scared of losing your comfortable life? I don't think so. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was her quiet sobbing. I sat there, my jaw clenched, waiting for her to say something, anything, that would make me feel like I wasn't completely wasting my time. But she didn't. I'm moving out, I said finally. The house is yours for now. I'll take care of the kids' expenses, and we'll set up a custody arrangement. But this marriage is over. No, she said quickly, her head snapping up. Ethan, please. Don't do this. Don't give up on us. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll quit my job, I'll go to therapy, anything. Just don't walk away. It's too late for that, I said. You made your choice, Lauren. Now I'm making mine. She reached across the table, grabbing my hand, but I pulled away. Don't, I said sharply. You don't get to play the victim here. You're the one who destroyed this marriage, not me. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a shaky breath. What about the kids? She asked, her voice breaking. How are we going to tell them? We'll tell them together, I said. But not tonight. I want them to have one more night where they don't know how badly you screwed everything up. Lauren's face twisted in pain, but I didn't care. I'll stay here until we figure out the details, I continued. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. This is just logistics. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she said again, her voice barely audible. I know you are, I said, standing up. But sorry doesn't change anything. I left the room, leaving her sitting at the table, her head in her hands. As I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, I felt a strange sense of finality. The anger was still there, burning in the background, but it was joined by something else: acceptance. This was the end of our marriage, and there was no turning back. The next day, I sat down with the kids. It was the part I dreaded the most. Lauren joined me at the table, though she looked like a ghost of the woman I used to know. I kept my focus on Sarah and Caleb, both wide-eyed and full of questions as they sat across from us. "Your mom and I need to talk to you about something important," I began, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. Lauren glanced at me nervously, and for a second, I wondered if she'd try to sugarcoat things. I had no intention of doing that. The kids deserved the truth, or as much of it as they could handle. "Your mom and I aren't going to be living together anymore," I said plainly. "We've decided to separate." Their reactions hit me like a punch to the gut. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and Caleb just stared at me, his face pale and confused. "Why?" Sarah asked, her voice cracking. Lauren started to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. "It's complicated," I said. "But this is about us, not you. Your mom and I have grown apart, and we think it's best for everyone if we go our separate ways." "But you still love each other, right?" Caleb asked, his voice small. I couldn't lie to him, but I didn't want to crush him either. "We both love you very much," I said carefully. "And we'll always be your parents, no matter what." Sarah wiped her eyes angrily. "This is your fault, isn't it?" she snapped at me. "Sarah!" Lauren gasped, her voice breaking. "No," I said, shaking my head. "This isn't anyone's fault. It's just, sometimes, adults make mistakes, and those mistakes have consequences." I glanced at Lauren, daring her to contradict me. She didn't. After the conversation, the kids went to their rooms, and I was left alone in the living room, staring at the wall. Lauren came in a few minutes later, her face pale. "They hate us," she whispered. "They're kids," I replied. "They'll adjust." "Will they?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Or have I just ruined their lives?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Over the next few weeks, I moved out of the house and into a small apartment nearby. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to have the kids over on weekends. I made sure they had their own rooms, their favorite snacks in the kitchen, and a sense of stability in the midst of the chaos. Lauren and I communicated only when necessary, usually about the kids. Every now and then, she'd try to bring up the past, her apologies, her regrets, but I shut it down every time. "I don't want to talk about it," I'd say. "Focus on the kids. That's all that matters now." One afternoon, as I was unpacking a box of books in my apartment, I came across an old photo album. It was from the early days of our marriage, back when Lauren and I thought we'd have forever. I flipped through the pages, staring at the faces of two people who looked so happy, so full of hope. It felt like a lifetime ago. For a moment, I let myself grieve for what we'd lost, not just the marriage, but the dreams we'd built together. Then I closed the album, set it aside, and got back to work. Months passed. The divorce was finalized with little fanfare. Lauren kept the house, as agreed, and I retained joint custody of the kids. They were still adjusting, but they were resilient. As for me, I focused on rebuilding my life. I threw myself into my work, joined a local running group, and started reconnecting with old friends. It wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness hit hard, and I'd find myself staring at my phone, tempted to text Lauren. But I didn't. The turning point came during one of my weekends with the kids. We were sitting in the living room, playing a board game, when Caleb suddenly looked up at me. "Are you happy, Dad?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I glanced at Sarah, who was watching me intently, waiting for my answer. "I'm getting there," I said honestly. "It's been a tough year, but I think things are getting better." Caleb nodded, seemingly satisfied, and went back to the game. It was a small moment, but it stayed with me. For the first time in months, I realized that I wasn't just surviving, I was starting to move forward. Lauren and I had one last conversation not long after that. We met at a coffee shop to discuss a scheduling conflict with the kids, but the conversation drifted to other topics. "How are you doing?" she asked hesitantly. "I'm fine," I said. "Busy with work, keeping up with the kids." "You?" She looked down at her coffee. "It's been hard," she admitted. "I miss us. I miss what we had." I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to tell her how much she'd hurt me, how much she'd taken from me. But what was the point? I hope you find what you're looking for, I said finally. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I thought about it for a long moment before answering. Maybe someday, I said. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It just means letting go of the anger. And I'm not there yet. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I understand. As I left the coffee shop that day, I felt lighter somehow. The anger that had consumed me for so long was starting to fade, replaced by a sense of clarity. Lauren's betrayal had shattered the life we'd built, but it hadn't destroyed me. I was still here, still standing, and I was determined to build something better for myself and for the kids. The past would always be a part of me, but it didn't define me. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free.